I'm going to talk today about, I don't know, interpretation, context, and stream-based information literacy. It seemed as good a name for this as anything else. What I'm not going to talk about today in depth, very often if I'm doing a workshop, I'll go entirely through the SIFT methodology and through the different steps of SIFT. SIFT is a lateral reading approach to information literacy. We, along with Sam Weinberg, who developed lateral reading approaches, we have a book out, actually, which I'm going to just mention here to move on, about the method called Verified, coming out from University of Chicago in November. And if you want sort of an in-depth approach there, obviously it'll be in the book, but you can also find it on a LibGuide near you. It's been very successful in library instruction, and there are people that write it up better than I do. The key difference with SIFT and with lateral reading as well is about the doing before the thinking. That's really the shift from other checklist approaches. So if you know previous checklist approaches like CRAP or COCOA or RADCAB, or Facebook had one called Escape. There are lists of things to think about, and they're not necessarily bad things to think about. But there's many items, and most of the questions focus on looking at the thing itself, right? And so, when was the information posted, online or published? Are the links functional? Has the author published more traditional format like books or journal articles, which is a little bit different, but it brings us to the fourth point here, which is the questions aren't really determinative, right? They're questions, but if you were to answer that and you were to say, oh yeah, this person has books, right? Well, there's a lot of cranks out there, and they have books. It's not particularly hard to put out a book under your own imprint or under the imprint of some of these publishers of crankdom. Similarly, if a link is broken, does that mean it's a bad source? Well, if you dig into it, you'd say, well, no, I mean, not that alone. But then you get to this question, well, you ask all these questions, and like some of them come up positive and some come up negative. At the end, after 20 minutes of this, what do you really have, right? Well, the links are broken, but it's a .org, and this person does have a book, but it's on a publisher I don't read. It starts to get it doesn't really get to the heart of the problem, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is in a minute. SIFT is a list of things to do. They're short things to do. The first one is just stop, and that is just to recognize whether you're in an area where you actually do have existing knowledge or not. If you were to ask yourself, the question we ask people to ask initially is not whether something's true or false, but just a much simpler question, which is, do I know what I'm looking at here? Which is where most people fail, right? They don't even get to the true or false. They don't ask themselves whether they actually know what they're looking at. Investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. And then after you get that context, which often is a very short process, we're not looking for a research project here, but for some basic additional context. Excuse me, it's early in the morning here and I'm still a little parched. Then you think, right? Then you come back and you do the thinking, then. So it's about context reconstruction. Now, I'm going to let's do a couple exercises around just one aspect of F in SIFT, find better coverage. And I'm going to do something here. This is not the whole program. I think sometimes people think the whole program is just the SIFT graphic. It's not. There's a whole way of teaching this that we go over in the workshops that we do when we do interventions. But we can do a piece of it. And this will be a use of the find other coverage. And I'm going to scaffold it a little. Like part of it when we do it with students, we will scaffold by giving them search terms to start, and then we'll do something on choosing better search terms. We're going to do an early version of it here. And we're going to start off, as I like to do, with novelty food items. So this is the first prompt here, and trust me, it won't be all. You didn't bring me out here just to talk about novelty food. Are these fake or real? Are they both fake? Are they neither of them fake? Is one of them fake? And I'm going to give you all a second to go and do that. And in this case, if you want to scaffold the terms, you can open up your phone or open up, open up another tab and just look for cheeseburger Oreos. Should give you good results. And if you wanted to do, I think just hot dog flavored popsicle is going to give you good results too. If you need to put Oscar Mayer as the thing, you can do that. And rather than replying immediately in the chat, I'd like to do something here called the. Am I going to be able to see the chat while I'm in this mode? Maybe not. Let's do it anyway. Something called the cascade. So both one or neither, just type it, but don't hit return in your chat. If it's one, say which one is fake, and say which one is fake. And if it's both, just say both, and if it's neither, say neither. I'm going to give you all a minute to do that, and then maybe I can find a way to. Where's the chat here? The chat's hidden here, I think. There we go. All right. So cue it up. This is called the cascade. When you're doing Zoom teaching, type out what you're about to say, and we're all going to hit return at once. And what I should see then is a wall of things saying if both, neither, or one, and choosing which one is fake. So ready? 3, 2, 1, hit it. All right. Librarians and informational instructional librarians and information literacy folks for the win. Yeah, it's the cheeseburger Oreos. And this is not meant to be a hard one. I often use this as a beginning example because it's actually to point out what we do in some situations, but we don't do in others. The truth is, if there are cheeseburger Oreos, the idea exists, and that's scary too. Thank you, JS. The truth is, if there are cheeseburger Oreos out there, someone has written something on it, right? So there's gonna be some coverage of it. And if there's not, maybe there's a debunk, or maybe on the other hand, maybe there's nothing. The same thing is true with the hot dog flavored popsicle. If the hot dog flavored popsicle exists, I can absolutely confirm that there is somebody out there that has written a think piece on the cold dog. So that's a broad idea here, is that when we think about find better coverage, there are exceptions. But one of the things we think about is for certain things that occur, there should be some coverage that exists that is maybe bigger and broader than what arrived to us via the social media. So we got one source through social media, but other sources probably exist. And when we're looking at a food product like this, we kind of intuitively know that, right? It's not unfamiliar to do this. This is how you would solve that problem. When we look at other things, it's weird. It's like a switch kind of flips for us, right? So this is something that we use as a prompt. It's picture. It says 4 children for sale. Inquire within. And is shared with. It's still shocking to me that people were allowed to sell kids in the 1930s, right? And so the question we have here is. What do you think, before you check this out, don't laterally read, don't use the F yet. Before you check this out, I want you to just sit for a second and think about your reaction to this. What do you think initially, right? What do you think initially this is? Real, photoshopped, real, but out of context, okay? And I want to stress here that what you're doing now is not the work. We stress that with students. But I do want you to notice what your initial reaction is, so that if you find out it's something different, that you can realize that that maybe your initial reaction was not quite right. And so think about it for a second, and then go ahead and get the context. And again, we'll scaffold this for you, but it's not a particularly tough scaffold here. 4 children for sale photo, 4 children for sale. You could also, if we had a link for this, we could have it with the students, do a reverse image search, which for this particular prompt works fairly well. So I'm going to give you, this one's a little harder. It requires some skimming. We do find that reading comprehension is one of the inputs into information literacy because of just required techniques like skimming. And I think it's an undervalued input into this. I think if I was going to do one thing in terms of general education for misinformation, actually reading comprehension and reading skills and I wouldn't even do SIFT. Like, just throw a lot of money at reading comprehension, the ability to skim, the ability to quickly summarize. But SIFT, on the other hand, is a very short intervention, which I guess makes it more attractive. Anyway, go ahead and do it, and then we're going to do the cascade again. And what I want you to do here is, I forget if I reveal, okay, yeah, what do you think? What I want you to do here is just say real, miscontextualized, or photoshopped. And then if you want to put a little something, just a very little something after it to give some context of something you found, go ahead and do it. Type it in. And this was a little hard. If you didn't get all the way through it, I'm kind of rushing through here because we don't have time for a class, and I'm just trying to give you a sense of some of the things that we do for students here. Go ahead and ready, type it in, and then 3, 2, 1, and hit return. Yeah, so it's a little more complicated, right? But it's it kind of depends on what you initially thought, right? So and this is a point that we'll come back to. If you initially thought it was Photoshop, no, it's not Photoshop, right? That's a real photo. If you thought that the children were being sold right at that moment, then maybe not. But if you dig into it, what you do find is that these children, at least 2 of the children, do appear to have been sold, or at the very least, they've been transferred. They were transferred to other people that abused them, and there's no record. There's no formal adoption record or anything like that of them, and so we kind of have their word for it. But I in this case, I would take the word of the abused. In this case, we do know that this is a picture. It is some of the context of this picture is it was taken by a newspaper reporter. It's not from the 1930s. It's from 1948. So if it was shared with that 1930s, I can't believe that they still sold children in 1930. It's from 1948. But yeah, I think in general, I would say, yeah, I mean, it's if you were sharing this and you were like, this is really depressing, you're right. It's really depressing. And it is evidence of something, right? So one of the things that we do with this is, we do mix the true and the false. And part of the thing we really want to stress with people is stuff that you might have dismissed. I actually captured that as an example. When I first saw it, I thought, oh, well, this is probably just a joke that someone did and it got blown up. And well, I mean, whatever you say, it wasn't a joke. It was something a little, something a little darker. And so sometimes you can dismiss things. This is particularly important for social issues. A lot of the things that are most important in terms of social issues are things that aren't plausible to us because they're outside of our experience, right? If you think about, whether it's various forms of police abuse, whether it's various challenges that people face that are sort of outside of our experience, they may all seem implausible to you. They don't match, Why would a police officer just all of a sudden do that? You're in the car, you must have done something, right? They don't match your personal experience. And so if you fall back on a plausibility analysis and say, does that sound to me like something that happens? It's limited by your experience. Plausibility is great if you're in an area where you have a lot of direct experience, right? I can tell you if it's plausible that the department chair would have done X or Y because I know the department chair, I know what they tend to do. I know I can use plausibility for that. But for some of these things that we look at in social issues, it's a really bad filter. And so breaking that idea that that can't possibly have happened is a really important part of this for us. All right. We'll do Buzz Aldrin because I think there's one other point here I'm going to want to make later in the animation. I don't know if I set up to play my audio. So here's what I'm going to do for this one here. I'm going to give you, you don't have to be subscribed to TikTok. I'm going to give you in the chat the TikTok link here so that you can hear the audio, but I'm going to then play this. And if you can't hear it, it's Buzz Aldrin. And what he says is this. You can kind of see this here on the captions. All right, so I don't know if you saw the captions there, but basically Conan O'Brien says, I remember it was such a big moment. My family woke us up and we came downstairs to watch and land on the moon. And Buzz Aldrin said, no, you didn't. Because what you watched was an animation. And then, it's kind of, Conan says, I have very hazy memories, and kind of cut there. All right, so this one's a little bit different because I think most people don't think that this, I hope most people in the audience here don't believe that this proves the moon landing was fake. But you can do something else. You can imagine what might this mean to other people, right? So you kind of got to put yourself in the shoes of someone that might be sort of moon landing hoax conspiracy curious. And what would people think they're looking at here, right? So we generally with students will let students kind of say, oh, well, this is what I think, and there's some people that believe this and so forth. We're careful with the conspiracies we engage with. The moon landing one is a oh no, Purdue won't let you out. Okay, well, I hope my description was I forgot that. Hope my description was okay. Anyway, Buzz Aldrin says. You didn't see me land on the moon. It was an animation. It was an animation. That's what you saw. And so what people think they're looking at here, you can sort of postulate that someone thinks, oh, what he's revealing is that actually the moon landing happened. It didn't happen. It was produced by a Hollywood studio. What you were looking at was something faked. You were looking at this animation. And so if you're a conspiracy theory, the idea that this is some sort of mission, that all of a sudden Buzz Aldrin just spills the beans after all these years. If you're not a conspiracy theorist, one of the things that's interesting to me is I don't know what he means. I mean, I think there's overwhelming evidence that we landed on the moon. I don't think it's in dispute. But at the same time, I don't know, what does it mean, this animation? Maybe he's just saying that it was something later at school or whatever. In any case, the idea here is not to spend time thinking, right? Just notice the reactions, and then let's get the context. So type in your phone or laptop, set of keywords, and focus here on that animation here. You can also use the Conan thing if you want to get a decent search, because it's about this particular thing he said to Conan. Right. I think someone might have shared the YouTube video I'm about to show. Let me see. It's the same YouTube video. Oh, that's the that someone shared the YouTube video of the same thing that's on TikTok. I see. All right. Now, since this one is a little bit complex, we won't do the cascade, but I've tricked you all into doing the work because you thought it would be this. Um, let's look at what you find. What you find if you dig into this is that he was talking about this animation here. I'm going to give you the link if you want to see it, but I'll play it and talk over it. It does roll some ads. Okay, but no, we're good. So he's talking about this animation here, and as you can see, this is an animation of the what appears to be the module landing on the moon. You can actually see where is it? You can actually see there's one part where it actually says animation under it in this old computer-like font, right? And so what you're looking at, though, when you look at it, is while they were playing the radio broadcast from the moon, obviously there's no camera on the moon when the module is landing. You can't, like, you've got to get on the moon to put the camera on the moon, right? Like, that's basic physics, I guess. So when they were listening to the radio signals before they landed on the moon, they had produced an animation to sort of show what was happening at the time, to give the TV audience an idea. And they played that animation. It was labeled an animation at the time. It wasn't some big trick or something like that. And then what you see once they get on the moon is you see the footage that we're more, you see the footage that looks like this, right? And so for an adult, at least, in 1969, there was no confusion that one was animation and one was on the moon. But I think what Buzz Aldrin is saying there is, for a lot of kids that watch that, they may have confused the two. And I think that's what he's talking about, right? Is that, no, you didn't see me land on the moon. You saw an animation, right? And I think that's what he's saying. That's my guess, right? All right. That's the last one that I'll make you do here. But a point here too is even a fact check of something that you already kind of know the overwhelming evidence for can be useful in a number of ways. It reveals something I think that's pretty cool about this, which is I never knew about this animation. That's a neat little piece of history. And you can also share that. Like when people are confused by something, you can go and you can share that and try to help build a better information ecosystem. I'm going to skip over this. All right. So how does this work? What does this end up doing, right? So one of the assessment questions we use is this Fukushima flowers thing. It's flowers near a nuclear plant in Fukushima. We ask, is this good evidence of the safety of conditions around the Fukushima plant? Right. And what we find in pre-SIFT, before a SIFT intervention, is students engage in this plausibility analysis, right? And so they'll say, does this sound like something that would happen? Do I think it's, do I trust nuclear power companies? And they'll say, why would you trust a nuclear power company? Of course, this is just part of the devastation from corporate greed or something like that. Other people will say, no, this is just, hippy dippy bull crap. Other people will say, I can tell the picture looks fake. It looks like it's Photoshop. You can spot the artifacts. And it's a real photo, but you look hard enough in any photo, you'll think it's Photoshopped. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. And what happens post-SIFT is that people go, let me see what people said about these flowers, right? That's the big shift is and they come back and then they still think about it, right? But I'm not quite ready to think about this with just this one little morsel that you have given me. And I'll just say to SIFT, there's a lot more than just let's search instead of doing something. I mean, that's the impulse, that's the habit. You got to root the habit, because the habit is the basis of everything. But it's about techniques to do it effectively, efficiently. We do choosing search words. We teach them select domain knowledge about things like, what the difference between like a think tank and a university research group is, and those sorts of things. Unique ways about thinking about claims and what it means to fact check. I'll talk about that more later. And moving from capital T truth to a focus for fit for purpose, which I'll also talk about more later, right? So rather than is it true or false, is it good evidence for this? Was your initial reaction appropriate, or maybe a little too intense or a little too muted? And this is a really key one here, moving from an individualistic epistemology. I know because I can prove this in my spreadsheet myself, to a social epistemology. I know because I can confidently navigate our social information architecture. And so there's a lot of really big things going underneath something that looks very simple. So how does it work? Pretty good, I think. The biggest pilot we did was in Canada, civics pilot, 70 plus schools, demographically diverse. It ended up being across all modalities because we had the wonderful luck to have planned this thing right before the pandemic hit, and then we had to do the intervention during the pandemic. So we taught face-to-face, blended online. Thousands of students, grades 7 through 12. And this is not the only thing. This is the one I often talk about, because this is the one where all the questions that came up in our previous interventions, whether the ones that I was involved with or the ones that Sam Weinberg was involved with, we put in methodology to address all of those questions, right? And so it's my favorite because it does address those. And the results here are consistent with previous published research as well. This one is out as a report for the project, but is winding its way through the publication process at the moment. So what do we find after students go through this? And again, I just showed you the F and SIF, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff we do too. So about a 7-hour intervention, which is actually pretty small. I mean, it's not as small as some librarians are forced to do, but 7 hours still as an educational intervention is small. The big thing is they move from personal plausibility to social knowing. And so you can kind of see this here. It's small on the slide, but I find that these paired responses, where it's the same student, in a pre-test and a post-test, they're the most revealing to me. The numbers, of course, are when you're looking to be confident about the direction of the effect are important, but understanding what's going on, these paired responses are just crucial. And first here, we have the student failing. They looked at a letter supposedly to Einstein written in English from the University of Bern. And it says, we regret to inform you, we're rejecting your PhD thesis for being too artistic or something. And the question is this good evidence of, Einstein's PhD being rejected, et cetera? And what the student says in the pretest is the letter is addressed to Mr. Einstein, is signed by a professor and dean of science, and stamped with the stamp of the University of Bern. And they say, yeah, this is good. I'll note here too, there's a little corner of an Einstein commemorative stamp on this, right? It's fake, right? And if you're really attuned to it, but people don't realize how much they don't notice if they're in a certain frame of mind. If you're really attuned to it, you'd be like, how did a stamp from, how did an Einstein commemorative stamp from, 2005 end up on this, 1905 letter? And you look at this and you think, well, this student isn't very good at critical thinking. This student has some real issues. But here they are after on average 7-hour intervention. They look at the Fukushima flowers prompt and they're like, I Google searched the image and found a global news article saying the cause of the mutation was likely fasciation, not radiation. right? I mean, that if you looked at that, you say, oh, well, this student knows what's going on. This is the student's, you know, and what are they doing? They're learning to navigate again our social information architecture, right? And fall back on plausibility. What we're kind of asking the student to do here, which is like knowing nothing about, you know, the conventions of European universities in 1905 and what would happen or not happen in a PhD program at that time, like, you know, fall back on your own plausibility analysis of whether this was written to. I mean, it's kind of a dumb way of going about it, right? The student doesn't know; they don't have any background in this, and yet the students do believe that this is the students do believe that this is. I got a scary note that my system was going to start an update, but I think we're safe. All right. The students believe that the first part is what they need to talk about to show that they know something, right? That they need to show that they did this sort of analysis. Same thing here. The bottom one is student rates a true article false, and then they on the post test they rate a true article true. And again, when I did a keyword search to see if the story was shared, well, I found indeed the story was confirmed to be true by two reliable news sources, BBC News and The Guardian, right? So it's simple for students, but it reflects a more nuanced model. And part of the thing we're looking at here is about shifts in our information environment. One thing is, in a world without gatekeeping, the ability to assess reputation matters more, right? Yeah, I could talk for hours about that. I'm looking at the chat, that .org and edu and stuff. There's a lot of stuff honestly, in 7 hours, about 4 of it is unteaching people stuff. I'm not even kidding. 4 of it is teaching people stuff, bad things that they learned. Reputation of sources and reputation of claims. It's more important to have the skill now. In a world with a lot of gatekeeping, no one was throwing a random newspaper on your doorstep, right? If you had a newspaper on your doorstep, you subscribe to it, you know where that newspaper's from, you know what it's about. But in this world, of course, the news comes from random places that you've never seen before. So you need to be able to assess reputation of those things. In a world of disaggregation, context matters more, right? So if you think about how you might receive news or other information previous to this, in oral culture, it's always been a little different, and we can put that aside. But at least in print culture, the way that you would receive news is normally as a bundle. There'd be some claim being made, but it'd be wrapped in context, right? A newspaper article, it might have a headline. The headline might even be deceptive, but it's attached to something that gives you the bigger story, right? Now on the web, a lot of that is detached, right? A lot of that is not. The web is a relentless stripper of context. In a world of increasing social and technical complexity, the sense of personal plausibility doesn't really cut it. And so we try to understand knowledge as a social production, and to find the answer to something is learning how to navigate the social infrastructure of knowledge, usually. And then, yes, bring your own stuff to it, bring your own sense of plausibility to it, but start by navigating the social infrastructure of knowledge and then figuring out where the piece for you is, what your personal experience might add to it and so forth, right? It's not to throw that away, it's just bring that in after you've built up that context. It's also a shift on what it means to know something. So one of the things I've been really interested in recently is this idea. I don't know if people are familiar with argumentation theory. Argumentation theory, like I found it in the past year, and I'm just surprised there's not more people engaging with it because it has so many things to say about this moment. But what argumentation theory is our argumentation theory kind of ditches the question, how do we know things and how do we believe things? And argumentation theory says, when someone professes to believe something, what are they socially obligated to show, right? Like, so I say, hey, I want you to believe this. What are my assumed obligations if I want you to believe something, or if I want you to share it, and so forth? So it looks at this and it kind of meshes logic and rhetorical analysis. And again, when looking at this through an argumentation theory lens, I think it's really interesting because it's partially a shift in what the student believes the expectations are for them when they say they believe something. In the first case, the expectation is, I can show you my train of thought. Let me show you what I thought about. And that's what I need to show. In the second case, it's like, well, if you're sharing this with me, did you check to see where it came from, right? Do you know the context of it? Like, that's what you owe me if you're going to advance it, right? And it's a real shift in what we expect in the obligations. What I always say to people is, you have no obligation to believe a certain thing, any of this. I don't care what belief you come to. But I do care that when you come to that belief and you express and you ask me to believe it, that A, you know where that thing came from, and B, you know what other people have said about it. And if you disagree, great, right? But that's your obligation, right? Your obligation is to have that really basic knowledge around that thing. Instead of simply the obligation is show me your personal logic, right? That's the fundamental obligation, right? Know the context. And this is particularly important on the internet, where content finds us and the internet strips context. And we can talk about that social obligation also in terms of how little time it might have took you to actually get that context, right? The fact that if that context was 90 seconds away and you didn't go do that before you asked me to believe this thing, then how seriously should I take your idea, right? How seriously should I take your idea if you didn't take your idea, or this claim serious enough to get the 90 seconds of context, right? And I really think that social obligation and shifting that social obligation is a key piece of this. Because the students turn out, once we show them this and build them, students turn out to be able to do this, right? But it's different. It's just a different sense of what their obligation is. All right, let me talk about this. This gets a little bit wonky, and I hope this is something I haven't talked about. I talk about it in our workshops in a much longer thing, but I haven't talked about it at this level in sort of keynote yet. So I hope this is clear. Maybe if it's not clear, write down a note, and I'm happy to talk about this more in the Q&A. So here's another shift. Right? Does the full context justify my initial reaction? And this is a formulation. I actually came to this formulation like 2018 or so, but now that I have hit argumentation theory, I think I have a little more conception of what's actually going on here, right? So we react to everything before we have good context. We can't stop reacting, right? When we learn more context, what we actually are asking isn't actually if the thing was true. I mean, it's kind of that. But we're actually asking, was our initial reaction still justified? And that's a really interesting piece of this. Or should it be moderated or intensified? We're also asking, with more context, does it mean what I thought it meant? Or does it mean something different, right? And so that initial reaction is actually where investigations are grounded, right? We tend to have this very positivistic view of this stuff, where, well, the investigations are grounded in the relationship between the claim and the world, but it's actually grounded in our reaction, right? So this is a big shift here. We're not just fact-checking the relationship of a claim to the world, but rather the defensibility of a stance to a claim once we know the context and its relationship to the world. So this is weird realization one. You don't fact check a claim, you fact check your feelings about the claim, or the imagined feelings of some other audience, actually. And it turns out we're pretty good at doing that. I mean, we're sometimes uncharitable, right? But it's something that we do almost natively. We read something like that Buzz Aldrin thing, and we are immediately saying, what does this mean to someone that actually believes this? And we're engaging that process without any prompting. Because it's the way, if you know anything about linguistics, that's that's Brycean linguistics, that's formal pragmatics, that's relevance theoretic approaches. We can't not interpret things that way, right? We have to kind of approach things this way. So one example of this I use is this tomato soup protest. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but these activists come up, it's this video, these activists come up and they throw tomato soup at a Van Gogh, right? And I could play the video here. I think I won't. I think most of you probably have seen this. And it's pretty short. They throw tomato soup at the Van Gogh, and then someone says, "Oh my God!" Another person says, kind of in this weak voice, "Security," which I always think is kind of funny. And then they glue themselves to a wall and read a statement about big oil and climate change and social priorities, right? And when this initially happened, most people were enraged, shocked, disgusted, depressed, and it kind of broke out into two things. On the liberal side, you had sympathy, I think, for the two young women. Like, they're from a generation, like, no one's addressing this. They're going to have to live with the consequences. I can see why they're so frustrated, but this is not the way. You don't take it out on Van Gogh. You don't destroy our history, right? On the right, it was not as charitable, right? On the right, you see some things here. The saying goes, you damage it, buy it. So that'll be 40 million pounds. I think that's $70 million, right? Leave them glued to the wall for a couple days. You have other people saying maybe we should cut off their ears as a punishment. It would be fittingly ironic, et cetera, et cetera. And I think most of you probably know this, but if you don't, I'll give you a chance. I'll give you a chance to show off. Does anybody know? Let's just I'll throw it in the chat. Does anybody know the missing context? What piece of information was missing from this great debate? Oh, maybe I'll get to surprise some people. All right, it's this. It's behind glass. Yeah, yes, MF. The artwork wasn't in fact ruined. It's behind glass. And talk about like a really interesting psychological phenomenon. It's just like the Einstein stamp. If we're in a frame of mind, we don't see it. Look at that picture now, right? Look at that picture now with the glass. It's so freaking obvious. It's behind glass once you know. But people did not know, and they thought it was the painting was ruined, right? This painting was taken off the gallery floor. It was wiped down. It was back up on the wall within an hour while the whole Twitter universe and the TikTok universe were still going wild and still escalating about this. So this is an interesting thing to think about, right? Because why? I think we would consider, okay, well, everybody was misled, but why? Why was it considered misleading when most of the facts were right? I know this seems like such an obvious question, but I think obvious questions sometimes get us interesting places. But let me point out this. After all, there was a protest. The video was not edited. The protest was about big oil. Tomato soup was thrown at the painting. The painting really was Van Gogh's sunflowers, or one of the sunflowers, right? It wasn't a copy or something like that. The two women were activists. They weren't actors or anything like that. It happened that morning. It's not some recontextualized video from the past or something like that. Like most stuff in most perception of the video was wrong, except this one thing, right? This one thing is it's behind glass, And so if you ask, is it true? And you kind of do a relationship of the claim to the world, you say, well, 90%. And sometimes you'll see students engage in this behavior, and it's super fascinating. Right? You'll give them something and the key piece of it is wrong, right? I think you've all seen this. Like you say, is this true or false? And the key piece of it is wrong, but they'll say mostly true. And why is it mostly true? Well, it happened here, and they list off the things. It's like, well, yeah, but the key piece, right? How do you know the key piece? Right? How do you know the key piece? And what you'll find if you do even minimal introspection as you go through one of these processes is that you don't necessarily know the key piece because you've done a deep down analysis. We're going to do a bit of analysis here, but you know the key piece almost immediately, intuitively. Why do you know the key piece? The match with the real world is less important than the match with something else. And the object of our investigation is what it made us feel, right? And what argument we thought it was supported, right? So one of the things I'll say is feelings far from being, feelings far from being so like, there's this belief if we didn't have initial feelings about something, like then we'd be so logical. Well, you want to see what logic looks like? Logic looks like that. Logic looks like, well, 90% correct, sort of Spock-like whatever. Feelings are really important, actually, right? Because what our feelings show us is what we thought was important about the thing, right? And the way we can tell that, and this is a thing that we do with students, is we say, if you had the full context to start, would your reaction have been the same? And we ask them to imagine what their emotional reaction would be like if they had known it was behind glass. And we can ask them to imagine the emotional reactions of others, right? And without that, it's actually kind of hard, right? Without that, you've got to do actually some pretty complex analysis, which I'll show you in a minute. But you can do this if you can say, for instance, we did that children for sale thing, and it says it was from the 1930s. Well, it's not from the 1930s, right? It's from 1948. But that doesn't really change anything for us, right? We still look at it and we're still horrified. Now, if it was from, the picture, of course, is not from 1850, but if it was from 1850, it might be different, right? It might be different because our assumption is, as we start to analyze it, our assumption is that, well, we kind of knew things like that happened in 1850. It was shocking for this. But you see what we're doing? We're coming to those reasons. We're able to come to those reasons because our feelings are doing a big X marks the spot over the piece of the thing that's important to us and the piece of the thing that's not. And the way that we get there is by imagining the reactions if different pieces of context are taken away or added. And again, it's kind of neat, but we seem to be built to do this. We just got to get in the practice of doing this. Now, what's going on, right? So we say, would your reaction have been the same? Why? And what's going on here is, and you don't have to do it at this level, but I want to show you how I find this part really neat. What you're doing in this process was saying, well, what if you had known this to start? Or what if it turned out it wasn't this, but this? You're revealing the hidden argument that piece was seen as being used in. And it's not something that the student even necessarily knew was the argument, right? You're actually doing kind of a complex rhetorical analysis using feelings, right? So what do I mean by this? Well, the claim here is not necessarily the claim, right? So this is where we bring in argumentation theory. And I don't know if you all know Stephen Toulmin and the Toulmin model. Some of you, if you've been in information literacy for a while, might be aware. But the tool, maybe you knew it, but not as Toulmin model. Basically in Toulmin model, you have grounds, which is evidence. You have a warrant, which shows why the ground supports the claim, and then you have the claim, right? And you can initially you're like, well, they're making a claim about this video is a claim, but the claims it's actually not, right? The video in this case is grounds for something, right? It's evidence of something, and then the conversation around it puts it in that context. And in this case, it's probably evidence of a claim, an unspoken claim, like these protests are out of hand, right? In Toulmin, the big thing is the warrant, right? So the idea is like, why does this evidence support this claim? And that's often hidden in a Toulmin analysis, right? But if you think about the claims the protests were out of hand, what is the warrant? The warrant there is the damage is extensive, right? Like if you're going to say it's out of hand, the sort of thing you say about protests is the damage was extensive and people are being hurt that are innocent. That's generally the warrant for a claim about protests being out of hand, right? And there's a million other things in that video, right? But if you're looking for the stuff in the warrant that connects that tomato soup protest to a general claim, unspoken claim that the protests are out of hand, like these are the two important things. Now, when you go, and the liberal argument's a little different, good sentiment, wrong action, but it still rests on damage, right? The liberal argument is the cost benefit is not right. So when you go and you get that context, and again, this is not something the student has to map out, what's actually happening here is initially the evidence is seen as supporting damage, which is crucial to the connection for the argument. When you get the full context, you realize that that there was no damage, right? And that there was no harm really to anything. And so the connection of the evidence to the unstated claim falls apart. And this is, again, this is something, I mean, like if you were teaching students to do this, it's meticulous. It's very hard to do. I mean, it takes a lot of work to teach students to do this sort of rhetorical analysis. But by imagining different reactions and kind of getting to using their feelings to figure out what it turns out, a lot of times what causes the emotional reaction are actually the pieces of the important pieces to the warrant, right? Because that's what's causing them to move to this claim or this broader realization. And so it's a way of thinking about using feelings, I think, that is somewhat different than we have in the past. I've thought about this issue of would it be worthwhile to show students, kind of bring back the Toulmin analysis stuff? And I'm on the fence about it. I'd be interested in what people think about this. I don't think it's something that students would do in the moment. I do think that doing a couple of these helps you understand that it's not just so much in life right now. It's not just about whether the evidence is real, the video is real, or whatever. It's what it's being used in service to, and it's the underlying hidden argument. And I think the Toulmin stuff does that really well. Again, it's not a sort of ready to hand. The student sees something on the web and they pull out a Toulmin chart and do it. But I do wonder if doing a few activities like that in class could help students understand how arguments are constructed, and how they're often being pulled in to support arguments they don't fully understand. This is particularly important in things like conspiracy theory and so forth. Weird realization 3, the gift of surprise. So we talk about feelings, but I think I can do this in the 9 minutes. This is what I've been working for a year and a half on elections misinformation, getting very deep into it. This is what a lot of civic misinformation looks like. So Colorado, 30,000 non-citizens got voter registration mailers. 30 voter registration mailers sent to non-citizens were a mistake. Colorado claims 30,000 voter registrations sent to non-citizens. State Colorado incorrectly sent voter registration notices to 30,000. Colorado raises eyebrows with accidental mailing. 30,000 non-citizens got to vote. And then this headline, a set of headlines taken by people in the comments are odds on how many have been completed and returned. Note that phrasing, completed and returned by illegal immigrants. Sure, the 30K non-citizen voter mailers, which is just an oopsies. Colorado's Secretary of State blames a database glitch for 30,000 non-citizens receiving voter registration mailers. This is what misinformation looks like. So much of what we're hung up on tends to resemble like what fake news was in 2016. But if you're looking at how the information environment is manipulated and confused, it's like this. So what's the facts behind this, right? So SIFT still works here, right? If you do a search, what you find is these were postcards, right? They're in English and Spanish, and they said specifically U.S. citizens you must be a U.S. citizen to register. They're not a registration form. They're a postcard reminding you to vote, right? Oh yeah, Beam. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, responding to a chat there. The materials were sent out, and they say very clearly that you can't vote if you're a non-citizen. Also, it's really clear why this happened. There's no mystery as to why this occurred. You don't have to come up with some alternate explanation. They pulled a file from the driver's license list, as a lot of times happens. A format encode that was supposed to indicate non-citizens got borked, and so they went out to not just non-citizens, but they went out to everybody on that list. But it didn't exclude non-citizens, So again, what are you looking at here, right? You're looking at there's an argument, and then there's an implied warrant, the Secretary of State is Democrat. There's no obvious non-malicious explanation. It's going to result in more citizens voting, right? And that's beneficial to Democrats. Therefore, this is possibly a scheme to steal the election. But when you get more context, this falls out, right? There's easy explanations of why this happened. And it actually doesn't allow anybody to vote. They go to a website and the same protections are there as always are there. They have to check a box, certifying they're a citizen. And there are cross checks that will identify them if they testify to that wrongly. And importantly, like really severe penalties, right? It's not going to result in more citizens voting. So the argument, falls apart, right? It's not just about the claim, it's about the argument, right? But we're not asking students to do that. What we're doing is we're asking them, so it's not just your emotions, but when they go to SIFT and they're looking at those articles, we're trying to get them to pay attention to anything that surprises them. And this is kind of a really important concept, right? And you got to listen carefully, because if you're just blowing through things, you may miss your surprise. But when you're going through and you look at it and you're like, oh, it told non-citizens they can't vote. And that's like mildly surprising. That's not what I thought this was going to be, right? And that sense of surprise often indicates that the new information you found violated one of your incoming assumptions. You're surprised because you thought one thing, it turns out is a different thing. And so that can often help students, again, looking at an article that's maybe 5 or 6 paragraphs long, spot, well, what's the relevant thing I'm bringing back from this contextual exercise, right? Importantly, you can't checklist this, right? And the reason why, what I say, what we say in the book Verified is, a checklist is great if you're flying a plane, you're flying a Boeing 747 or something. Well, the steps for taking off that Boeing 747, they're the same every time. The steps for landing are the same every time. It's the same checklist. Checklist is great. Here, it really requires an attention to the specific question that you're dealing with. So what undoes the argument in one case? In this case, non-citizens were told they can't vote, and this is a mailer. It doesn't allow them to vote. Is obviously very specific to this, right? And you can't have something that says, well, when you go to check to see if the thing really allowed a person to do something. You can't have a sort of extensive checklist with this. So what you've got to really cultivate is that sense of expectation, like what do I think happened, and that sense of surprise when that expectation is violated. Wow. I have never timed something so well as this hour. In summary, this is a lot, but context seeking is deceptively simple, but it's actually incredibly powerful. There's a lot going on underneath the hood. Many problems perceived as critical thinking problems are actually due to lack of context seeking. Students can use feelings such as surprise or imagined reactions to better understand what matters to them in a piece of evidence. And it's not just fact checking; it's a shift to social epistemology, and I think that's probably the most important piece. Like, again, when we assert something, what do we owe people? What was our due diligence? How do we conceptualize that? Is our due diligence just, I'm going to show you my process of thought, which for some things probably fine, if I'm saying, here's why I think we should buy this car, my process of thought, maybe. But for things outside my ken, right, things outside my domain, it often looks much more like the social epistemology. I did the due diligence. I went and I saw what people were saying about this, where this information came from. In the end, I believe this or I don't, right? But I've engaged with my social obligations for this. I said to plug the book once. Book's coming out November 17th. Me and Sam Weinberg got together and wrote a book. Sam has been, this is a good excuse. My partnership with Sam Weinberg on the lateral reading stuff has been one of the, I don't know, it's one of the luckiest things in my life. We kind of bumped into each other, and I feel like we had two different halves of the same puzzle. And so I'm very excited about this book, and it goes in much deeper. But you can still get the book from 2017, the web literacy for student fact checkers. You look at, there's a civics curriculum. A lot of that civics curriculum is online. If you look for Control F, there's a free thing in Notion I built in 2019 called Check Please. So there's lots of resources around the web, and there's lots that are built, again, if you go and you search through LibGuides, there's lots of incredible stuff that other people have built as well. So you don't, my publisher would hate me for saying this, so you don't got to buy the book. A lot of stuff's out there, but I'm very excited about the book. All right, thank you. So let's talk.
So
yes, you can pre-order the book. I do have to answer that one right away.
Right,
on Amazon or at the University of Chicago site.
Okay. Well, let's thank Mike for this amazing talk. There was a back channel conversation. It was just really fantastic. So thank you for joining us this morning. And then if you go ahead, please, and put your questions in the chat. I think, Mike, we have quite a bit of time for Mike to go ahead and answer your questions. So I was kind of wondering, to kick us off, actually. So you were, kind of one of the, early folks to kind of start looking at, misinformation and disinformation, and I kind of wonder how you, how you got started, sort of down that path of, of that as an option.
Yeah. So I can tell you exactly, because it's a really foundational memory for me. I was working as an instructional designer, and not just the kind that codes up a website, but working with faculty, doing faculty development, helping them set up assessments, doing teaching and learning stuff as part of a teaching and learning center. And one of the things I was tasked with was leading two committees. One was on quantitative reasoning, and one was on civic digital literacy, is what we called it. And these were a set of college-wide outcomes. And part of that is we had to come up with assessments and assess these things for the first time. The civic digital literacies had stuff on participation, collaboration, and some other stuff, 4 things at all. But one of them, and the one that was assessed most and chosen by faculty as something they taught in the course most, was something called critical consumption, which is a term from Howard Rheingold. And this is stuff, right? It's exactly this stuff. This wasn't how Howard Rheingold presented it. Obviously, it's built out a lot more. But the idea, right, that this is one of our civic digital literacies is from Rheingold. And so we came up with some assessments, and the assessment we came up with is working with the library. The library had a 2-shot instruction on this stuff they were doing. They were using CRAP at the time, 2010, and the assessment we came up with was we were going to pull a bunch of student papers, and then we were going to randomly select citations from them and go through them and just see if what the quality of citations was. In this very sort of, not seeing if they were exact fit for the paper or whatever, but just going through and looking for anything that was a web citation, what was the student picking? And so the library was going through that. We built a rubric, and I get a call in my office, and they're like, "Hey, you got a minute? Can you come over here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I need." Okay, I mean, you can talk. And like, no, I think you got to come over here. So I went over there, and I remember they were in a conference room. They had a little laptop. It was hooked up to a projector, and they had it up on the projected screen. And it was a site that said something like, I'm going to get it wrong, but it was something like "We are all government slaves" was the title of the site. And down the side were like advertisements for colloidal silver and things about the New World Order and the UN's coming to fluoridate your water and stuff. And they say, so this was a citation on a paper on food policy. So, my first impulse, I honestly, it did not cover me in glory. I thought, well, let's use, it's 2010. So I was like, let's use clickers, right? Maybe they just need more formative assessment. But while I was watching them teach it, what I noticed was from the back of the room that only a small number of students were approaching this problem the way I would, which is like, well, let me go and find out what the site is about, right? When they were doing it from the front of the room, and I had the benefit of sitting in the back, they were just reading it. They were just like looking through it, right? And then as we started to look at crap, we started to realize, oh, crap. No joke. But they're actually doing exactly what we're telling them to do. That's why they're getting it wrong. And so I tried to make that case for 3 years, from 2010 to 2013, and I failed miserably because everybody wanted to talk at that time about politeness on the internet. Like, I don't know if you remember 2010, but the big idea was that we're not polite enough, which I mean we're not, but misinformation wasn't really the thing. And so I kind of retired that. I did other stuff, and then 2016 came around, and I thought, well, let's make another go at this. And that's where I also had the luck to bump into Sam, and I think having both found very similar things through different routes, it made us more confident in our thesis about what was going on, and I think it helped power me forward.
Okay, thank you. There's a question in the chat from Erin, who basically says that she's used SIFT with students and whatnot and successfully, but that they also say that in their normal practices they probably wouldn't be so thorough. And so her question is a couple of questions. How do we encourage a shift from a larger culture of scrolling with passive ingestion to what seems plausible and not even worth questioning? Or do you think that a focus on sharing practices and social engagement is the best way forward because of a stronger emotions involved, like surprise, that we can question, in what we can question?
So yeah, absolutely. I see this problem as something that has to be a partnership between the user interface in education. And actually, we've done something. I worked with Google on something called the vertical dots. You do a search on a search page, you'll see vertical dots. I helped design those, yay! But they're a little handle in the search results where you can click on something and get a short description of the source before you click through. And the idea here is we as educators can teach these things, but if the interface isn't making finding context as easy as clicking through or scrolling up, then we're working at odds. Right. And a good example of this, of course, is TikTok, right? Like, we can teach this stuff, but the interface of TikTok is so pulls one in so much, and kind of especially on a phone, really strips any sort of move, really disincentivizes a move away from TikTok. So it makes it harder to do these things, whereas like the little things on Google make it easier. So that's the one area that I've been looking at. I was talking with the folks at Google earlier this month, and one of the things I did learn is that there's an immense amount of Google searches about TikTok videos. So there are people that do it. Like there are people that are seeing a TikTok video, knowing how to sort of window out on a phone, which is a skill that we got to teach, like how you push up and then scroll to your other window, doing a quick search on the thing. But I do think it's a pairing there. I also think it's not important that we get it 100% right, because it's a social problem. And the nature, we find this is one thing I've learned from elections work. You don't need everybody to check something, right? You really don't. You need one person out of 100 to check it, and then to inform other people, right? And if you can get there, right, you're doing well. So yeah, if the student scrolls past 100 videos, or 1,000, maybe even 1,000 videos, but 100 of them are dodgy. And they check one or two and share that information or with other people, then or even if it's even if 5 or 10% of your students come out and they become sort of the family fact checker, like you've helped a family, right? You've helped a social universe, right? So I think we have to think about it in these two ways. One, we do want these general skills. Everybody should know how to do them. But two, a lot of the social benefit is going to come out of that 5 or 10% of your class that is more engaged and more conscious of these, and use that to sort of build a social resilience.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is a question I bet that you've been hearing lately, sort of about AI, right? And this is from Michael, who says, there's great potential for AI to generate mis and disinformation extremely quickly and cheaply. How much of an issue do you think this will be in the near or medium term? I think it's a great example of why a checklist approach will be insufficient in the future, as much as the publicly available info may be AI generated.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. So when you look at what AI really masters, it sometimes gives you, it sometimes gets a question right or wrong, right? But the thing it really masters is style, right? And what we know from our research is that style and sort of a fluidity of style, or a style that matches, academic prose or journalistic prose or something like that, is often used by people as a proxy for credibility or reputation. Well, this sounds like journalism, therefore this is journalism. And if you actually look at CRAP, you'll see that that's kind of what it asks you to do, right? It asks you to, is there any grammatical errors? Does the language sound unbiased? That sort of thing. And so it pushes you further into using style as a proxy for things that are not style. And that over time has always, increasingly on the web over time, that's been a bad approach, but it's going to get completely unworkable with LLMs, because it's not just, now anybody can have a nice site, anybody can get a spell check and whatever. It's like anybody can write perfect sounding AP style about something that doesn't exist, right? And so we've got to wean people off that, and I think it's going to be hard. People often use style as a proxy, not just in language. I mean, people use style. Like an interview happens and someone comes, are they put together? Do they? And it's just an unconscious thing that we do, and we got to sort of free ourselves from that. The big focus has to be on really provenance. Where did the thing come from is going to be so much more important. And that's the thing that LLMs do really poorly. They can create something, they can even answer questions correctly a lot of the time, but they can't tell you how they know. And I think that's the real issue.
Thank you. So the next question, I think, is something we're all thinking. So we're going to ask you, which is, how do you find examples that you use in your talks and your classes?
Yeah, so two ways. The first is for the true examples, just I've built a habit of anything I see that I think either, that's obviously fake. I stop and I go and I do the thing and I collect it. And I remember that it was enough that I thought it was fake. And sometimes it turns out to be fake, and sometimes it turns out to be true. And then the same thing with anything that I think is true that turns out to be fake. But it's actually more important to find on a daily basis. I collect the things that turn out to be real, like the 4 children for sale thing. That's something like just on a daily, I encounter it and I look at it and I pull it in. For the ones that are fake, very often I'll reverse engineer it. So for example, there's an account called Hoaxeye on Twitter, which just jumps into the replies of anybody sharing something that's a fake photo. And so I go and I look and see who Hoaxeye is replying to. and I pull examples from that. You can go to a destination like Snopes or something like that and find examples, and then you mesh those two. The harder ones to find, the ones that you have to do the daily work, is really the true ones, because Snopes actually doesn't cover much true stuff, right? I mean, some, but if you look, it's mostly the things that are false. Whereas the true stuff, you've just got to be on the lookout for that. I found a one that I loved the other day. It was just, I didn't know if it was true or false, but I just thought, well, that's really compelling. 2 million people in the Baltic states in, I forget, like 1990 something, linked hands across Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia to protest Soviet oppression. And it's a picture of them on the highway. And it's just the sort of thing where you think, oh, this is going to be miscaptioned. And then you go and you look at it and it's not, it's true, right? It's one of those things where, again, like our plausibility fails when something is outside of, I don't have the experience of living in those countries at that time. So our plausibility fails. So it's a perfect one. And I like that one too, because it can be harder to do some stuff around social movements in the US, because people, and you do it eventually, you don't have to shy away from it. But if it's your initial example, sometimes people get their hackles up. They're like, oh, you're going to tell me what to think. So sometimes it's easier to start with stuff that happens elsewhere where students develop these plausibilities. But the same process about that social movement in those Baltic states is the same process you go through with that is the process you would go through doing that in an American context, a US context.
Okay, thank you. So then there's a discussion going on in the chat about AI, and someone asked, do you have any thoughts about AI as an opportunity? Thinking about can we, if we were able to build in safeguards, right, that we don't necessarily have in place in social media, but do you have thoughts around how we might use AI productively, and how we could maybe improve information that people encounter on the internet?
Yeah, I kind of think of AI at the moment sort of like a calculator that is kind of a tool for sort of menial tasks, and it can do that really well. So, for example, I don't know if other people have discovered this, but if you want to sort of create fake data to make a example for a class or something like that, you can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, make names up for 10 people, give each one a bicycle, a car, or a bicycle and a car, and it'll go generate a table for you. You can have it list out ideas or the title of something, right? And some of them will be pretty close to good. It does well with figuring out what a title should sound like. It is really good for things like programming. I've used it for things like programming, and it can generate for those routine things that you do. It can generate a pretty good code. And of course, the thing with programming is you can run the code and see if it works, right? So the verification of that is easy. So I think there are a lot of ways to do it. And I have thought about, the one thing that you shouldn't do is ask an LLM a question to which the answer to you is important, right? And yet that's what a lot of people are using it for. So I have thought about, would it make sense, since everybody's impulse is to use the LLM stuff for the worst possible thing, would it make sense to show people how to use it for things that are more productive, and then use that as a chance to highlight the places where it's not as productive? The places where it's productive, this is the problem that I think people can't grasp, is it's a super useful tool for experts, right? And it's a super lousy tool for novices, right? So I have no qualms with it. If you write a paper and before you send off that paper, you're like, I'm going to throw this into, the the licensing and everything might be an issue, but I'm going to throw this into Chat GPT and get some comments. Chat GPT will give you some bullcrap comments, and it'll give you some good comments on what you could do to improve your paper. Some of those might kind of be the feedback you need to think, oh, no, this is right. Like, actually, I didn't explain this deeply enough. And people have shown that it does this pretty good. But it's only doing that good because it's only being helpful because you can look at those comments and you can say, oh, these 7 make sense and these 3 are nonsensical. So for an expert, it is really good, right? Because it kind of gives you a little bit of that sounding board for things. It's kind of like, having a person that's, well, it's a good sounding board for these things. For a novice, it's really lousy, right? Because you don't have the ability to distinguish. And I think this is what our students are struggling with, because they're using it for things in which they are novices or have emerging mastery. And that's not where you want to use this.
Okay, thank you. Well, I hope you're holding with us, because I know you thought this session was a little shorter. So thank you.
No, I'm good.
But another question that someone asked, or there's a couple questions I think along this line, are so do you have thoughts on the ACRL framework for information literacy in higher education, or perhaps other frameworks and sort of for developing the wording is for developing shared, concrete, and effective foundations for information literacy instruction. So
yeah, I mean, I think the underlying in that framework, I'm forgetting what they call the items in that framework. It's not they're essentially what you would call in understanding by design, enduring understandings, but I forget the term is a principles or something else. But the one that I use a lot, of course, is that authority is contextual and constructed, and I think that ends up being a really important understanding. I think yes, I think the underlying understandings in a framework like that are important. I think that the newer framework really does lean in to the social nature of knowledge, which is really important. And that, of course, meshes with SIFT quite nicely. So I absolutely think that those things are important, but I do think that in my experience with faculty development and curricular materials, there's sometimes like just a really big gap between here and here, like the implementation, because it's one thing to sort of have the ideas, and then it's another thing, like what do these ideas look like in terms of, and again, I come back to understanding by design, which kind of changed my approach to design. But the question there is always, well, you have this understanding, but can you explain to me, like, this person 5 years from now had your course, and this person here in this alternate reality didn't have your course, and can you explain to me one thing in their day that's different because they had your course or didn't? And that ends up being something that they're doing or some way that they're reacting to things, right? And not necessarily at that level of the understanding. So absolutely, I think the stuff is really important. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. At the same time, I find that most people agree with the stuff in there and already kind of know the stuff in there. I have been sort of teaching that for a long time. The thing they struggle with is like, okay, like, how do I get this into my students' life? And I think that's where we need to really put some resources.
Right, and along a related line, but I think taking us back to your talk, Samantha asks, let's see, like she sees, sort of that, opportunity, like you need to have opportunities for students to, experience that their initial impressions, right, of plausibility could be incorrect or fallible, right, and yet, you're also at the same time trying to sort of build their strength, based on their prior knowledge. And, how do you like sometimes they get defensive. And so,
Yeah. So a lot of it, so much of this is just, I've been a little frustrated with, some takes on SIFT is, oh, well, you do these three things. And there's so much stuff that goes into a class, into faculty trainings. One of the things that I show faculty when we're doing this is I constantly say little things in the class that are like, remember, like there's no prize for prize for guessing correctly. You don't get a big prize for guessing, you get the prize for checking, and just constantly try to do that. And it's all like there's a thing recently, it's about math education, but by Dan Myers, talking about like how teachers are making 40 decisions every 3 minutes in a class, to reinforce this, to do this, to take the to pressure a little, to pull back a little. And a lot of that is what we try to do with faculty training. But I think we need more of that, because a lot of what makes it successful is learning that language. The other thing we do with stuff is we don't do the true or false. We do the looks good enough for this. Seems kind of dodgy, or run away, like we try to break this idea of sort of the positivism of absolute truth to like, well, is this suited for the purpose you need it? Is this something like I should look into this before I jump in, or is this something like I got to go somewhere else? I really focus that on actions, right? And that's less of a judgment about your judgment and more of a judgment about what you're trying to accomplish. I'll also just say one thing. I saw Steph here said something about, conspiracy theories often turn the ACRL item on its head, right? They say, well, authority is constructed and contextual. I do have a perspective on that, which is we don't teach the social construction of knowledge in why it works. Why it, as horrible as it can be, it actually works much better than individual cognition. We don't teach that at all. We don't teach, what sort of safeguards are in the system and how like personal reputation is. We don't teach any of that. And then the first time someone hears like a social theory of knowledge, it's from a conspiracy theorist, right? And they've never thought about the fact that, whoa, wait a second, like this is all socially constructed and it's just this guy pointing this guy and this guy. They've never had any sort of instruction on that. And so I think just to take Steph's question, I think it makes it more imperative for us to present a useful social theory of knowledge before the first one that they encounter is from a conspiracy theorist.